Hey everyone, welcome back to the table. I'm Scott, and today we're going to go through our How to Make a Diorama series. This is going to be a 5-part series where we teach you how to make this diorama from start to finish. We're going to tell you what materials you need, what techniques you need to learn, show you those techniques, and how to make this thing look awesome. So come join us as we walk you through how to make that happen. Hey everyone, welcome back to the table. I'm Scott, and this is part 4 of our diorama series where we are showing you how to make something from start to finish. We've done quite a bit so far. We've put this thing together. We've started with a foam base, built up on it. We've created an outline here, as you can see, for the water. That's going to help us out for later on in this session when we pour the resin. We've got the beach laid down. We have all the rocks. You notice the coloring. We took and put down these blotches that you can see here, these blotches of color that are in there. And then we put a wash over top of that. Now, when we first put them on there, that we broke it, that we did something bad and it's never going to get better. And, well, hopefully now you can see the vision that with the wash, it has muted it. Now, you're going to see a further transformation when we do the next step, which is dry brushing. But what I want to show you is a technique. Technique number 1 is choosing the right brush. So having the right brush is going to be absolutely key to doing good dry brushing. So, for example, I have 2 brushes here that you can see. This brush right here, the bristles, as you can tell, bend really, really, really easy. So these bristles, you can move them with really hardly any effort. So if I'm dry brushing with this, I am going to be able to get on the brush. I am going to be able to get something on there. It can lightly coat it. But what you really want to have in a brush is a snap. You want really something with shorter bristles and or something that snaps, almost like it's rigid, where it's not going to move at all. And the more rigid it is, the better you're going to be able to dry brush, the more precise you're going to be able to dry brush. So by comparison, here's the other brush that we're using. And this, and notice that the bristles barely move. Being able to do what I just did with it, I have to actually with this one, I had to put some effort into it. And this is the kind of snap that you want. Now the bristles are a little bit longer, so the downside about the bristles being longer, as you can see on here, is that some of these are failing. With these types of brushes, they go through a lot of abuse, and you could just simply take a pair of scissors and cut them down, and you can continue to use them. And the other brush that I like to do, especially for something like this, and what we're going to use, is a paintbrush. So this is about a 1-inch paintbrush that you can get from the hardware store. The bristles, while they have a little bit more give than what that other the Army Painter brush, and this is actually the preferred brush that I like to use when I'm dry brushing. So that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is some paper towel. If you don't have paper towel, you're not going to be able to dry brush. Also choose something that you can put your paint on, kind of a trio of colors that I'm going to dry brush for each particular area. So what are our areas? Area number 1 is the beach. Area number 2 is going to be more of the grassy area. And area number 3 is going to be the cliff rocks on the side of the cliffs. And so each of those are going to have a different one. Now, to make your piece look uniform, to make it look extra cool, you want to try to pick a color that unifies all 3 of those together, because then people will be able to see the common element. Now, not to a point where it overpowers it. And you'll see what I mean as I'm going through this. But for this particular one of my favorite colors to do that with, and probably one of the most common ones that most people do this with, is a color called, Screaming Skull. So Screaming Skull is the perfect color to do that. It's an off-white, it's brighter, it can work. Now you can take and punch this up a bit further and go white. That's completely up to you. So let's get started. We're going to go from dark to light, and the other key to this is let it dry. You want the paint to dry. If you dry brush it and it's still wet, what's going to happen is you're going to smear the paint. You're going to smear the paint, and more importantly, you're going to mix the paint that's already on there with the paint that you have. You want distinct layers in between these. That's what makes dry brushing look cool. I'll show you more tricks along the way. I'm getting too chatty. I want to get to it. So first thing is first. We are going to take our Dawn Stone, give it a little extra shake. Here's a second trick. I'm going to actually wear a glove on my offhand. I'm left-handed. So I'm going to actually put a glove on my offhand. And the reason for doing that is the best way to test if you have saturated your brush too much, or there's too much paint on it, is to dry brush your hand. What I'm going to do to start doing this is I'm just going to dab the tips of my brush here. I'm going to get the tips in there. I could maybe kind of like smear it in there a little bit, work it in. And I'm looking for something like that. Come on. So from there, I'm going to actually put that on the paper towel. And I'm going to brush some of it off. If you're done dry brushing, I'm probably giving you too much info, but the magic trick is about to happen. So what I'm trying to do is get not all the paint, but most of the paint off of it. I want just a little bit on there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush it on my hand. And you can see when I'm brushing it on my hand how much is coming off. And if I'm having big globs coming off, what do you think is going to happen to your model? You're going to have big globs come off on your model. So the nice part about doing this is I can tell how much is coming off. And if I don't like it, if it's not enough, you can add more. If it's too much, put it on the paper towel again. See where I'm going with this. So test it out first. Do it every time you put more on your brush. The other thing is I'm trying not to aggressively push my brush into the model. What I'm trying to do is just apply some pressure onto it. Really, you almost want to kind of like barely touch it. So here's a good example. If I do it up here, I can almost start up here, and then I could go down until I'm actually, you can feel the pressure on the brush when you're barely touching it. So what I'm going to give you some modes here. You got light dusting mode, I'm barely touching it, right? I got heavier mode, you can see the bristles moving, and then you get heavy mode where you can actually see the bristles bending. Okay, that's going to be our heavy mode. Your first layer is going to be heavy, your second layer is going to be medium, and your last layer is probably going to be light. And you could apply pressure how you want to do it. So we're going to go a little bit more aggressive. So I'm going to do this slow. The sides that I'm dry brushing mostly are not getting a lot of color. So I promise you, you'll see the magic happening a little bit more here pretty quick. But what you really are doing is laying down the foundation, what this thing's going to look like. You can see some of the magic happen already, right? One of the things I do want to caution you of is when you're doing this, you want to be careful that you don't go too aggressive with this, because this is a foam base and you can easily break pieces off with the brush of the foam, and then you got this weird color and you'll have to like patch it, make it look good. You don't want to have to deal with all that. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the grassy type area. So one of the things you can see, even just doing a bit of a dry brush here, you can see that the blending is happening here and compared to this. And you can watch the transformation from this one when I do it next. Now that we've got this section dry brushed, our next step is we're going to do a Ministratum Gray. But you can see the color difference between these. This one here is Dawnstone, and this one here is a Ministratum Gray. There is a difference. This is a lot lighter. Alright, so you can tell a big difference between this one and this one. This one has more. Notice it's blended more as well. It'll continue to blend there, and you'll see the variations of color. When we get to the final one, you'll see barely the variations, but there will be, and that's what's going to make it look fantastic. All right, let's get the rest of this thing done. Now we're going to move on to the sand. Well, this all dries up here. So the sand area is kind of dark. So what we want to do is bring that color back up to it. So the first thing we're going to do is Zandori dust. So let's put that in there. We're going to start dry brushing it the same way. No need to clean your brush. It should work just fine. So one of the things that you could see that I just did here is I blended the edge of this beach line, did some dry brushing to kind of smooth that out. It's going to help it so when you're looking at the water coming in, it's going to have more of a transition effect within it. So this is something to consider. So now that we have that in, I definitely like this line here. It's definitely helping. We're going to continue to blend that in. We're going to use Flayed One Flesh next. Give that a little shake. All right, we are starting to transform this thing into looking like something awesome. The beach is blended in. It's starting to feel more like a beach. It's got those colors. It's got those contrasts in it that are starting to come out. However, we need to do the final layer over everything, which is going to be Screaming Skull. Let's go to the beach, wrap this thing up, and then we'll get on to the resin. It's a little hard to tell on camera. You definitely can tell the beach area versus the rocky area. You can see the highlights that I was talking about that are going on here. You can see this area. This area almost looks good. You don't even have to put resin on it. But we're going to, because we're going to do some cool water effects with the waves that are going to really get some white highlights and make this whole thing just pop. What I want to do is do one more dry brush in here, super, super, super light, barely touching the thing, of white. I just want there to be a contrast here compared to this that is just going to be above the top, plus the waves that are going to be happening here will tie into the beach just a little bit more. All right, our dry brushing is done. Now, I don't know about you, but I think adding that white really, really, really made the difference. So it was definitely a good call. Now, you don't have to do that. It's up to you. I just felt like it was too dark, and I'm looking for a really big contrast between the different layers. The last thing we're going to do in this session is pour the resin in this area. Now, there's a couple things to know about resin. And there's a lot of different classifications and categories, but I'm going to keep it really simple and high level. Type number 1 is something called a UV resin. So UV resin, here's an example one here that I like to use, made by Popsicle, and it's a single bottle here, and you basically squirt it out, and it's liquid enough that will level it'll self-level, and you put UV light on it, and it cures it. Now, it needs to be a certain strength of UV light. The stronger the light, the quicker it'll harden and everything there. So you have to be careful with it. Now, one of the things you can do is actually put it out in the sun, and that will cure it as well. However, you want to be careful with that, because if you expose it too much to the sun, it could discolor and turn yellow. So you want to pay attention to the brand that you're getting and what you're doing. And this is another brand that I like to use. And by the way, neither one of these are sponsored by me. I'm just showing you what I use. You're more than welcome to pick something else. So this Let's Go resin, it's a deep pour resin. Now, the way these resins work is they are a two-part. That's the way I would classify them. Now, when you pour resin, typically you want it to be a thin pour. You're not looking to go, like 10 bazillion inches tall, and it will tell you on the box how deep they say you recommend that you go. Now, the reason that you want to go thinner is that when you are actually combining these two things, it produces heat, and the heat will and can warp your model, and it will pull into the model as well, because as it's drying, it's actually contracting. So you can see that kind of happen here. I'll show you a picture of the sister's diorama where the side of the resin or the side of the diorama pulled in just a little bit. The other thing you need to think about, what safety precautions do you need to take? Typically, these things are going to release fumes. You want to have yourself with a mask or in a ventilated area. And read the instructions. They're going to make recommendations. I highly suggest you follow those. Other thing that you want to think about is working time. So we're going to want something with a little bit more working time, which is part of the reason I'm using this deep pour, because it has a long working time. Again, the instructions will be your guide here. The other thing that you want to consider is how it responds to colorants. What I mean by that is you can use some ink. This is some Liquitex acrylic ink. And sometimes resin doesn't respond well to it. Some of the tools, I think it's important to describe the tools on this one. Number one is gloves. Wear gloves. You definitely wear gloves. Cups are extremely handy. You want to use them because you need something to mix in, so that's cool. Stirring stick, so you probably used one of these earlier, so you definitely want to have that. All right, first thing we need to do, we need to prep the area. What do I mean by prep the area? We can't just pour the resin, because what's going to happen if the sides of it don't have some type of form going around the edge of it? It's all just going to run off the edge, and that's going to create a big mess. Let's prep the area. We're going to do that by using one of my favorite tools, the hot glue gun, and we're going to use plexiglass. All right, I have here some plexiglass. This is really thin plexiglass. You don't have to use the thick stuff. I like the thinner stuff. Now, if we were doing a really deep pour, I would get thicker plexiglass so it doesn't flex. But this is just simple stuff you could get off of Amazon. We actually cut these circles out, and use them as objective, area terrain layouts, so we know how big the area is for the layout when we're playing Warhammer, and all the other games. So these work out really well. And what I'm going to do is actually hot glue these to the sides of the diorama and make a form, something similar to this. One of the things I like about this plexiglass is I can cut it with a pair of scissors, and it cuts quite easily. So I'm going to cut both of these pieces in half because I don't need the full thing. We're going to start by putting glue on the sides. So in this particular case, I'm just going to put the glue on the side here. It's going to look something like that. Now what I'm going to do now is actually move this back a little bit, and I'm going to put a layer of hot glue closest to the edge as possible, because I want it to be a good seal. If there's a crack, the resin is going to come out of it, and I don't want resin coming out of this thing. Make a huge mess. I've been there, done that, not a good time. And the good thing is, when we're done with this, we'll probably give it a quick sand. So if there's a little bit more on there than we expect, that's okay. And if we peel off a little foam, that's okay, because we're going to paint the whole side of it black. You won't even be able to tell. Okay, we have our supports on the whole side of it. I ended up putting another layer around the entire edge and the inside on the bottom. Why did I do that? I did that so we know we have a clean seal. We don't want it seeping through. When you look at the sides of this, you can see the glue and that there is a continuous stream along the edge. Now, it's okay if there isn't, and that's one of the reasons why we did this extra bit of glue here on the edge. You could alternatively use UV resin to do that. We're going to paint black up the edges. Just made sure that everything else was secured all the way around, taking a peek and getting an idea with the gaps. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put down some plastic paper and make sure we're good. Also, I'm going to take a lid and put it underneath it as well. So if there is a leak, it'll go into the lid, and if for somehow or another it drips over the edge, it'll go onto the paper. So double barrier is not a bad thing. The instructions tell us you need 2 parts of this, the A, 1 part of this. Is you can take a measuring cup and dump water in one, measure where that spot is, and then you could take the other one and measure 8 ounces of water and measure and mark that. I got my cup marked with A and B, so that's what I'm going to do next. Once I have both containers marked or sized up, I'm going to pour one into the other. Then I'm going to mix. Now the mixing, it all depends on what it is, but in this particular case, you're going to be able to tell because there's a swirling effect that's in there. So you're looking for all the swirls to be completely gone in this case. So we're going to continue to do that until it's ready. You want to just kind of be constant. Don't whip it like you're making eggs. Your goal is you want to introduce as few bubbles to this as possible. Now, in the packet, in the instructions in the packaging, they'll tell you how long you should mix it for. It all depends on the type of resin. So I like to do a test pour around the edges just to make sure. And I'm just going to look around the edges and to see if I see any resin seeping down into the cracks. If I see resin seeping down, I know I got a problem. Let's go ahead and pour the rest of this. All right, now that we have our resin down, there's a couple things we're going to do. One, I'm going to take this and I'm just going to have it go up on the shore just a little bit. I don't want it there to be a ton, but what I want there to be is a little bit on the edge of the beach, more than, that way the edge looks a little bit wet. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take this, which is some ink. I'm going to put a few drops in here. Now you could do this before you mixed it up, or you could do it after. It's completely up to you. You can see what's happening here is that it's separating a little bit and making it kind of stringy and cloudy. Okay, our resin is poured. The coloring turned out fantastic. You got that rich blue that's happening here. You got the sand and the contrast to the rocks. That's exactly what we were going for. Our next step is we're going to get the bubbles that are in the resin out. Now this is the way this is going to work is you're literally going to use a lighter, but if you have some type of little torch, that's fine. Make sure that you are in a ventilated area, and that'll give you the smooth, clean finish instead of a ripply finish in the resin itself. You can wait a little bit and you might see more pop up. Now this all depends on if you have a quick dry resin versus a quick curing resin versus a slower curing resin. Also, it's going to depend on how much you stirred it and how many bubbles you worked into it. So stirring slower is typically better. When you're done with your lighter end, it's going to be hot, so don't set it on something that's going to melt. That would be bad. Thanks for hanging out with us while we did this step of the project. I'm excited to be able to get to the final session where we're going to apply the waves to this to make it look like waves are crashing into the beach. I'm also going to put some of the grass on there and further define this area up here. We'll put some foliage, a couple smaller rocks in there. It's going to look great. It already looks great, and there's nothing that says you couldn't stop here if you wanted to, but one of the things that you always want to try to do is push it to the next step, and that's what we're going to do here. So this thing's going to come to life, and we're going to have even more contrast up in this area. So until next time, when we see you at the table, when we take the very next step and finish this thing off. See you there.